You're 6 years old, standing in a kitchen that reeks of cigarette smoke and something chemical you don't have a name for yet. Your mum left 3 hours ago with her boyfriend, the one she promises she'll never let back in. You don't know when they're coming back. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, maybe not at all. So you drag a chair to the stove because you can't reach the burners without it. You open a can of corn. With the can opener, you finally learned how to use. You boil water for macaroni because that's what you've seen done a few dozen times. You eat at the little table in the kitchen. You wash your own bowl. You turn on PBS Kids because there's no cable, just the free channels. And the bright colours and simple voices are the only softness in a house that has none. Then you walk to your room, if you can call it that. A mattress on the floor, a toy box, a blanket and a pillow. That's it. No bed frame, no dresser, no nightstand. Just the bare minimum of what a child needs to exist. You put yourself to bed. And when your friends ask what you did last night, you don't tell them you tucked yourself in on a mattress on the floor. You don't tell them you counted the hours until someone came home. You don't tell them you spent the evening with cartoon characters because they were more present than the adults in your life. You don't tell them that when you asked if you'd be okay alone, the answer was, the apartment's upstairs, not the lower level, and you're not dead yet, so you're not stupid. That was the reassurance, that was the parenting. You're alive, therefore you're capable. You don't tell anyone that you're 6 years old because in your world, age really is just a number. And this was the year you grew up too soon. This is your normal. The yelling, the disappearing, the learning to survive in a house where the adults are too high, too angry, too broken to notice you're still a child. This is how childhood ends. Not with a single moment, but with 1,000 small erasures. 1,000 times you had to be the adult because the adults couldn't be. 1,000 nights you went to bed wondering if anyone would notice if you just stopped existing. Remember, you don't choose to grow up too fast, you're forced to. And that difference, that distinction between choice and survival, can haunt you for the rest of your life. Let me tell you what it really looks like when a child grows up too fast. It's a 6-year-old who knows how to cook macaroni on the hot stove, because that's all there is, who can clean their own dishes, get themselves dressed, and walk themselves to school, when they make it to school at all. Because nobody makes you go right. Some weeks you miss 3 days, 4 days, and the teachers stop asking why. They just mark you absent and move on. It's a child who watches their mother with a man she swore she'd never let back in, who learns that promises mean nothing when addiction is involved. But it's also the kid in the big house with the pool and the luxury cars in the driveway, the one whose parents are VP or C level at some company you've never heard of, who have a cleaning service, a landscaper, a fridge always full of food, except the parents are never there. They're at the office until 9. They're on business trips. They're at conferences, dinners, networking events. They provide everything except presents. So that kid raises themselves too, with money instead of supervision, with freedom that looks like privilege but feels like abandonment. And by junior high, by high school, they're the ones throwing parties when their parents are gone, the ones sneaking into the prescription cabinet in their parents' master bathroom because there's no one there to notice, no one to stop them, no one to care until it's too late. Different tax brackets, same outcome. Then there's the child with the drunk dad, the one who learns to be silent during dinner, to disappear into their room before the yelling starts, to gauge his mood by the number of empty bottles in the trash, learning to drive at 13 so they can get their dad home from the bar, who becomes an expert at reading the room, predicting the storm, staying small enough to avoid becoming the target. And the child who doesn't just watch the violence, they're the target, the one who learns that their body isn't their own. That pain is normal, that adults who say they love you are the same ones who hurt you, who grows up knowing that survival means silence, that telling means consequences worse than the abuse itself. It's kids between 5 and 13 digging through ashtrays for half-smoked cigarettes because that's currency, who steal from corner stores, not because they're bad kids, but because hungry, and their parents learned $200 of food stamps is $100 worth of dope. It's the child who talks like an adult at 12 because they've been negotiating their survival better than a car salesman. The shapes are different, but the wound is the same. Psychologists call it parentification. When the roles reverse, when the child becomes the caregiver, the emotional regulator, the therapist, the one holding everything together. But here's what that actually means. You become the thermostat of the house. You learn to regulate everyone else's emotional temperature because no one is regulating yours. You walk into a room and immediately start scanning. Is mum sober? Is dad angry? Is it safe to speak? Is it safe to need something? Am I safe? And you make a deal, an unconscious transaction that will dictate the next 30 years of your life. If I'm good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, maybe, just maybe, they will see me. If I can manage their moods, anticipate their needs, become whatever they need me to be, maybe I'll finally be safe. If I give up my needs, maybe they'll give me love. That's the trade. Compliance for connection, silence for safety, invisibility for survival. And it's not a choice, it's biology. Because children are wired for one thing above all else: attachment. They will do anything to stay connected to the people who are supposed to keep them alive, even if it means abandoning themselves, especially if it means abandoning themselves. Your brain doesn't care if the attachment is healthy. It just knows alone equals death. So you adapt. You become what the environment demands. You bury the parts of yourself that are inconvenient, the parts that are too loud, too needy, too emotional, too much. And in that burial, something fundamental breaks. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. Like a bone that heals wrong, and you don't even realize it's crooked until decades later, when you can't move the way you're supposed to. You learn that your emotions are dangerous, that your needs are a burden, that love is conditional on how little trouble you cause and how much you can carry. So you disappear, not physically, but emotionally. You become the good child, the responsible one, the mature one, the one who never complains, never asks for help, never causes problems, and everyone praises you for it. You're so mature for your age. You're so independent. You're such an old soul. You handle everything so well. But here's what they're really saying. Thank God you're not a problem. Thank God you don't need anything. Thank God we don't have to actually parent you. And you learn to wear that identity like armor. You perform competence so convincingly that even you forget it's a performance. But underneath, there's a child. A terrified, exhausted child who's been holding their breath for years, waiting for permission to finally fall apart. Rich kids, poor kids, kids in the suburbs, kids in the inner city, it doesn't matter. When a child has to raise themselves, when the adults are gone physically or emotionally or mentally, when survival depends on becoming small, the result is always the same. They become an adult on the outside, but inside they're still that 6-year-old, wondering why no one stayed. There's something children who grow up too fast say, that sounds almost like a brag, but cuts like a confession. I was already 18 when I was 6. You know what that actually means? It means your brain skipped every developmental stage it was supposed to go through and went straight into survival mode. Because childhood isn't just time passing, it's a neurological and psychological necessity. Erik Erikson mapped human development in stages, and each one builds on the last. In early childhood, ages 3 to 6, you're supposed to develop what he called initiative, the ability to explore, to play, to try new things without fear of catastrophic failure. You're supposed to learn that the world is fundamentally safe, that adults will protect you, that you can make mistakes and still be loved, that your needs will be met without you having to earn it. But when a 6-year-old is dragging a chair to the stove to cook their own food, when a 12-year-old is managing their parents' emotions, when a child is walking on eggshells around a drunk father, or learning that their body isn't safe, those stages don't just get skipped, they get inverted. You learn that the world is not safe, that adults will not protect you, that mistakes have consequences that could destroy everything, that your needs are negotiable, conditional, dangerous, and your brain, in its infinite adaptability, rewires itself accordingly. Let's talk about what actually happens in the nervous system of a child who grows up too fast, when you're constantly exposed to threat, whether that's violence, neglect, instability, or just the unpredictable chaos of adults who can't regulate themselves. Your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, goes into overdrive. It becomes hyperactive, hypersensitive, always scanning for danger. This is what psychologists call hypervigilance. But that word doesn't capture what it actually feels like. It feels like walking through life with your nervous system stuck in a permanent state of something bad is about to happen. You're always 3 steps ahead, always predicting, always preparing for the next disaster. You can read a room in seconds. You can sense a mood shift before anyone speaks. You know which footsteps mean danger and which ones mean you're safe to breathe. That's not a superpower. That's a survival mechanism. And it comes at a cost, because while your amygdala is working overtime, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for play, creativity, emotional regulation, and long-term planning, is underdeveloped. You didn't get to practice being a child. You were too busy being an adult. And it doesn't matter if you were poor or rich, if your parents were addicts or executives, if you were in an apartment with a mattress on the floor, or a mansion with an empty refrigerator stocked by someone paid to care more than your parents did. The psychology is the same. Dr. Gabor Mate, who spent decades studying childhood trauma, says this: when children's needs aren't met, they don't stop having needs. They just learn to bury them. They learn to become what the environment requires them to be, even if it costs them their soul. And that's the trap. What saved you then? Your hyper-responsibility, your ability to survive chaos, your capacity to raise yourself, your ability to make yourself invisible, becomes what imprisons you now. Because you never learned how to not be the adult. You never learned that love doesn't have to be earned. You never learned that you're allowed to fall apart. You developed what attachment researchers call an insecure attachment style, specifically an avoidant attachment. Here's what that means in practice. You learned that depending on others is dangerous, that vulnerability is weakness, that the only person you can truly rely on is yourself. So as an adult, you push people away before they can leave. You don't let anyone see the mess inside. You'd rather be alone than risk the pain of being abandoned again. Or you go the opposite direction. Anxious attachment. You cling. You overfunction. You monitor every shift in tone, every change in behavior, convinced that one wrong move will make them leave. Either way, you're still that child, still making the same unconscious calculation. How much of myself do I have to hide to be loved? And the answer you learned was, all of it. Studies on adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, confirm what you already know in your body. Kids who grow up in violent homes in poverty, with addicted parents, with absent parents, with parents who hurt them. They don't just struggle with anxiety and depression in adulthood, they struggle with identity itself. Because when you spend your entire childhood being who others need you to be, the caretaker, the peacekeeper, the quiet one, the strong one, the one who doesn't cause problems, you never discover who you actually are. You become a reflection, a function, an echo of other people's needs. And deep down, beneath all the competence and all the performance, there's a question that never stops asking itself. If I stop being useful, will anyone love me? That question shapes everything. Your relationships, your career, your sense of worth, your inability to rest, your compulsion to fix everyone's problems while ignoring your own. Because the child inside you is still waiting, still hoping, still believing that if you just try hard enough, if you just give enough, if you just disappear enough, maybe someone will finally see you and decide you're worth staying for. So what does this actually cost you? Everything. You become an adult who never feels safe, even in calm rooms. Because calm is a lie. Calm is just the space before the storm. Your nervous system knows this, so you stay vigilant. You scan faces, you read tones, you monitor body language, you prepare for disaster even when there's no evidence one is coming. You flinch at sudden movements because your body remembers hands that turned into fists. You flinch at raised voices because your body remembers the screaming that came before the violence. You flinch at promises because your body remembers never again, followed by the door opening for him anyway. You learn that words are just sounds people make before they disappoint you. That "I love you" doesn't mean safety. That promises are just rehearsals for betrayal. So you don't let anyone close. Or worse, you let the wrong people close because chaos feels like home. Because dysfunction is the only language you're fluent in. Because a partner who yells or disappears or needs you to fix them feels more familiar than someone who's just stable. Healthy love feels boring or suspicious or like a trap. And if you were the rich kid, the one with the empty house and the full bank account, you turn to drugs, not because you're weak, not because you're broken, but because when you're 14, 15, 16 and no one's paying attention, when you have access and freedom and a void where guidance should be, substances become the only thing that fills it. They numb the loneliness. They quiet the questions. They make the big empty house feel a little less like a tomb. Junior high, high school. All those kids with money and absent parents. So many of them end up in the same place. Different drug. Same escape. Same attempt to fill a hole that was carved out by neglect disguised as privilege. You become an adult who apologizes for existing. You say sorry before asking for anything. You shrink yourself in every room you enter. You make yourself small, quiet, unobtrusive, because taking up space was dangerous once, and your nervous system never got the memo that it's safe now. You become someone who confuses exhaustion with achievement, who mistakes burnout for productivity, who believes that the moment you stop being useful, you'll be discarded. And you might be right, because you've spent your entire life gravitating toward people who reinforce that belief. Here's what you don't talk about. You're furious. You're enraged at the child you used to be for being so compliant, so desperate for love that you'd erase yourself to get it. You're furious at your mother who chose drugs over you, who chose a man who hurt her over protecting you, who looked you in the eyes and still walked out the door. You're furious at your father who drank until he couldn't see straight, who made you responsible for his emotions, who taught you that love means fear. You're furious at the parents who were never there, who provided everything except the one thing you needed, presence, who hired people to raise you because their career mattered more, who still don't understand why you're distant now, why you don't call, why their money couldn't buy your forgiveness. You're furious at every adult who saw a child raising themselves and did nothing, who praised your maturity instead of calling CPS, who said, "Wow, you're so independent," when what they should have said was, "Where the hell are your parents?" But you don't let yourself feel that anger, because anger feels dangerous. Anger might push people away. Anger might prove you're not the calm, capable person everyone thinks you are. So you bury it. You swallow it. You turn it inward until it transforms into something even worse. Shame. The belief that maybe you deserved it. Maybe if you were better, quieter, less needy, your mother would have stayed. Maybe if you were more lovable, your father wouldn't have drunk so much. Maybe if you were more interesting, your parents would have come home. Maybe it was always your fault. That's the real shadow. Not the trauma itself, but the meaning you made of it. The way you internalized abandonment and made it mean something about your worth instead of something about their capacity. You achieve. You succeed. You check every box, but none of it feels real. Because you weren't building a life. You were building proof. Proof that you're worth keeping. Proof that you're not the burden you were taught you were. Proof that you deserve to exist. And no amount of achievement will ever be enough to convince that terrified 6-year-old inside you that they're finally safe. This is the invisible grief of people who grew up too fast. You're mourning a childhood you never had, while everyone around you celebrates how well you turned out, how resilient you are, how strong, how successful, how together you seem. But fine is a mask too, and deep down, you know it. Because strong isn't what you are, it's what you had to become to survive. And survival isn't the same as living. Let me ask you something. Do you remember the last time you tucked yourself in? Not as an adult who lives alone, but as a child. As a 6-year-old who pulled a blanket up on a mattress on the floor. No bed frame, no real room, just a space with the bare minimum, and stared at the ceiling, wondering if anyone was coming home tonight. Do you remember eating at that little table in the kitchen that smelled like chemicals and cigarette smoke? Washing your own bowl because there was no one else to do it? Do you remember turning on PBS Kids before bed? Not because you loved cartoons, but because those bright colours and gentle voices were the only kindness in the house? How Arthur and Clifford felt more like family than the people who were supposed to raise you. Do you remember walking yourself to school, on the days you made it to school at all? Do you remember missing so much school that the teachers stopped asking why? They just marked you absent and moved on, like you were already invisible. Do you remember being told you'd be okay because the apartment was upstairs, not the lower level? Because you weren't dead yet, so clearly you weren't stupid. Do you remember being 6 years old and already 18? I need you to understand something. That wasn't maturity, that was abandonment. You didn't choose to grow up too fast, you were forced to. And the difference between those two things is everything. A child who's taught responsibility is learning life skills. A child who's forced into it is learning that their needs don't matter, that their childhood is negotiable, that love is something you earn by requiring nothing. And you learned that lesson so well that you're still living by it 30 years later. You still don't ask for help because asking feels like admitting failure. You still can't rest without feeling guilty because rest wasn't something you were allowed, it was something you had to steal. You still make yourself small in every relationship because taking up space was dangerous once, and some part of you is still that child, still scanning for threats, still waiting for the violence to start again. Here's what no one probably ever told you. It wasn't your fault. You didn't fail by needing. You didn't fail by being a child. You didn't deserve to watch your mother let that man back in over and over. You didn't deserve to go to bed hungry. You didn't deserve to raise yourself, while the adults in your life chose drugs, violence, chaos, or their careers over your safety. You didn't deserve any of it. The adults in your life failed, not you, but because you were a child, because those adults were your entire world. You couldn't see that. So you internalized it. You made it mean something about you. You decided that if you were just better, quieter, less trouble, maybe they'd stay. Maybe they'd choose you. Maybe you'd finally be worth protecting. But you were always worth protecting. You just weren't protected. And that's not the same thing. You were a child, and you deserved to be held. You deserved to be fed without having to cook your own food. You deserved to sleep without fear. You deserved to go to school every day with someone making sure you got there safely. You deserved parents who kept their promises, who chose you over their addictions, their anger, their careers, their chaos. You deserved a childhood, and the fact that you didn't get one doesn't mean you didn't deserve it. It means the people who were supposed to give it to you failed. That's their failure, not yours. But you've been carrying it like it's yours. You've been punishing yourself for their choices. You've been performing strength to prove you're worth keeping, when the truth is, you were always worth keeping. You just weren't kept. So where do you go from here? Not back. You can't undo what happened. You can't give yourself the childhood you deserved, but you can stop repeating it. Because here's what's happening right now, in your adult life. You're still making that same unconscious deal. If I'm good enough, useful enough, invisible enough, maybe they'll stay. That 6-year-old is still running your life, still making decisions, still protecting you, the only way they know how. And the first step to changing that isn't to fix them, it's to see them, to turn around and look at that child, the one you've been dragging behind you for decades, the one you've been trying to outrun, trying to outachieve, trying to prove wrong, and finally acknowledge what happened, not to wallow, not to make excuses, but to witness. Because until you validate what actually happened, you'll keep gaslighting yourself. It wasn't that bad. Other people had it worse. I turned out fine. But fine is a mask, and you know it. Here's what healing actually looks like. It looks like finally admitting that you're tired, that you've been tired for 20 years, that you don't want to be the strong one anymore. It looks like letting yourself feel the anger you've been swallowing, the rage at being abandoned, the fury at having to raise yourself, the bitterness at watching other kids get the childhood you were denied. That anger isn't wrong. It's information. It's your body finally telling you the truth. It looks like grieving, actually grieving, not moving on or letting go or any of that bypassing bullshit, but sitting with the loss, mourning the childhood that never happened, weeping for the birthdays no one remembered, the accomplishments no one celebrated, the pain no one witnessed. It looks like reparenting, not in some Instagram therapy way, but in the brutal, unglamorous way that actually works. It means asking yourself, what did I need back then that I never got? And the answers might sound like, I needed someone to tell me it wasn't my fault. I needed someone to notice I was struggling. I needed to play without fear. I needed to rest without earning it. I needed to be a child. And then slowly, painfully, you start giving those things to yourself now. Not to fix the past, you can't. But to stop repeating it. You start saying no without over-explaining, without apologizing, without softening it to make others comfortable. You start resting without guilt. Even when your brain screams that you haven't earned it yet. You start feeling your emotions without immediately trying to fix them, manage them, or make them more palatable for others. You start letting people help you, even though it feels like weakness, even though it terrifies you, even though every instinct says, don't show them you need anything or they'll leave. You start choosing people who don't require you to disappear to be loved. And most importantly, you start recognizing when that 6-year-old takes over, when you're making decisions from that wounded place, when you're operating from that old survival wiring. Because awareness is the first step to choice. You can't change what you don't see. And for years you haven't been able to see it because you were still inside it. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about unbecoming who you had to be to survive. It's about peeling off the armor, dropping the mask, and finally letting yourself be the messy, needy, imperfect human you were never allowed to be. Will it be uncomfortable? Yes. Will it feel like you're regressing? Absolutely. Will there be days you feel like a child again? Small, scared, unsure? Yes, good. That's not regression. That's the child finally coming home. Let them. Let them cry. Let them rage. Let them play. Let them be seen. Because you're not broken. You're not damaged beyond repair. You're just carrying a wound that never got to heal because you never stopped moving long enough to tend to it. Let me take you back to that kitchen one more time. You're 6 years old, standing on a chair you dragged to the stove, boiling water for macaroni because you've watched it done. And survival is the best teacher. You eat at the little table, alone. You wash your own bowl. You put yourself to bed on a mattress on the floor. And in that moment, something in you makes a decision that will shape the next 30 years of your life. You decide, I will hold this together. I will survive this. I will be so good, so quiet, so capable that maybe someone will finally notice. Maybe someone will stay. But here's what I need you to understand now, decades later, still carrying that weight. You were always worth noticing. You were always worth staying for. They just didn't. And that was never about your worth. It was about their capacity, their addiction, their violence, their absence, their inability to show up even when they promised they would. You were a child, and you deserved to be protected. You deserved to be fed without having to feed yourself. You deserved to sleep without fear. You deserved to go to school every day with someone making sure you got there. You deserved parents who kept their promises, who chose you over everything else. You deserved a childhood, and the fact that you didn't get one, the fact that you had to become 18 at 6, that you had to raise yourself, that you had to survive chaos that would break most adults, That doesn't make you strong, it makes you a survivor. And there's a difference. Strength is a choice. Survival is what happens when you have no choice. But now you do. You can choose softness over performance. You can choose rest over proving your worth through productivity. You can choose to stop being the one who holds everything together and finally let yourself fall apart. And here's what's true. You will still be worth loving. Not because you earned it, but because you always were. Your maturity was never the problem. The problem was that you had no choice. But now you do. You can choose to stop punishing yourself for other people's failures. You can choose to stop making yourself small to make others comfortable. You can choose to stop running from the child you were and finally turn around and hold their hand. And no, it won't be easy. There will be days you feel like that 6-year-old again. Scared, small, unsure if anyone's coming. Good. Let that child come home. Let them cry. Let them rage. Let them play. Let them finally be seen. Because you're not broken. You're not beyond repair. You're not too damaged to be loved. You're just tired. And you have every right to be. You never had a childhood, but you still have a future. And this time, you get to write it. Not from fear, not from survival, not from the desperate need to prove you're worth keeping, but from truth. The truth that you were enough then, and you're enough now. The truth that you didn't deserve what happened to you, but you survived it anyway. The truth that growing up too fast didn't make you mature. It made you a child who never got to be a child. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to let yourself be one. Not forever, not in every moment, but in the quiet spaces when no one's watching, when you can finally exhale, when you can finally rest, when you can finally admit that you're tired. You've been tired, and you don't want to hold everything together anymore. That's not weakness, that's the beginning of freedom. Because the child you buried didn't die. They've been waiting for you to stop running, waiting for you to finally say what no one else ever did. You didn't deserve that. You were just a child, and I'm here now. That's where healing begins. Not with fixing, not with achieving, not with proving, but with witness, with truth, with finally letting yourself be held. You were forced to grow up too soon, but you don't have to live like that anymore.